The wind carried grit across the barren plains, stinging Ethan Carter's face as his horse thundered toward the homestead. He had not stopped since the rider found him at dawn with the message clutched in shaking hands, "Your brother's not long for this world." The urgency in those words still rang in his skull. His throat was dry, his chest tight, but his boots dug into the horse's flanks, demanding more speed. He prayed the animal would not collapse before he arrived. The cabin appeared at last through a haze of dust, crouched low beneath the weight of the sky. Its roof sagged, its windows flickered with the dim glow of lamplight. Ethan slowed only when he saw the smoke from the chimney thin, almost gone. He swung down, boots sinking into dirt as he stumbled forward, every step heavy with dread. Inside, the air reeked of sickness, sour sweat, blood, and decay mingled with the faint sweetness of spilled cough syrup. Sam lay stretched on a narrow bed, his chest heaving in shallow gasps. His eyes, once sharp as an eagle's, now looked clouded, barely able to track Ethan as he entered. "Sam," Ethan muttered, his voice breaking against the silence. The man coughed, spattering crimson into a rag. His lips cracked into something resembling a smile. "You made it." Ethan gripped the bed frame, forcing strength into his voice. "I rode hard. Tell me what you need." Sam's gaze shifted past him, toward the shadows lingering by the far wall. Ethan followed it and saw them, the children. 4 pairs of eyes, wide and hollow, staring back at him. They stood in a cluster, thin arms wrapped around each other as though the slightest breeze might scatter them like dry leaves. Ethan's chest clenched. He knew his brother had children, of course, but he had never seen them gathered so still, so starved for more than food. The eldest boy, tall for his years, glared with a defiance Ethan recognized from Sam's youth. Beside him stood a girl with hair falling in tangled strands, her hands fussing protectively over the 2 younger ones, a silent 8-year-old boy with fists shoved deep in his pockets, and a tiny girl whose lips trembled as though holding back tears. Sam coughed again, pulling Ethan's eyes back. "They've got no one else. Promise me you'll take them." His words rattled in his chest, dragged out by sheer will. Ethan froze. He felt the weight of that plea settle on his shoulders, heavier than the dirt road behind him, heavier than the loneliness he had carried all his life. Children. He had none. He would never have any, God had seen to that. The world had branded him barren, a man unfit to leave a legacy. Now, fate demanded he shoulder 4 at once. "Sam," he started, but his brother's eyes sharpened with one last flicker of life. "Promise me." The room went silent, broken only by the crackle of the oil lamp. Ethan could feel the children's stares pressing into him, waiting for his answer, measuring his worth. He swallowed hard, his voice rough. "I promise." Relief softened Sam's face. His chest lifted in one final breath, then sank, and he was still. The smallest child let out a sound, not quite a cry, more a whimper of disbelief. The eldest clenched his jaw, refusing tears, his shoulders stiff as iron. The girl drew the 2 younger ones closer, burying her face in their hair. Ethan could do nothing but stand, hands fisted, the promise still burning on his tongue. He carried his brother out beneath a sky bruised with storm clouds. The ground was hard, unyielding, but Ethan dug with ferocity until his muscles burned and his palms blistered. The children watched from a distance, silent, their small figures etched against the grey horizon. With every shovelful, Ethan felt the finality of it pressing down. Sam was gone, and the duty of his blood now belonged to him. By dusk, the grave was filled, the mound marked with a simple wooden cross. Thunder growled in the distance. Ethan stood over the fresh earth, hat pressed against his chest, rain beginning to speckle his shirt. He had no words for prayer, only the memory of Sam's last look, the weight of his last demand. Behind him, the children shifted. He turned to face them, unsure what to say, how to stand. The eldest boy met his gaze squarely, as though daring him to fail. The girl clutched the youngest's hand tighter. The little one, Rose, if he remembered right, lifted her eyes and whispered, "Do you have food?" Ethan's breath caught. His throat worked, but no answer came. He had beans in his thill bag, a half loaf of bread back at his cabin, hardly enough for one man, let alone 4 hungry mouths. Their eyes were hollow, their stomachs likely emptier than his promises. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and felt the storm roll closer. He looked once more at the grave, the fresh earth already darkening beneath the drizzle. The vow echoed in his mind, binding him tighter than iron shackles. For the first time in his life, Ethan Carter was not alone. For the first time, he had something to lose. The sky cracked open with lightning, throwing the world into stark relief. He straightened, rain washing grit from his face. The children huddled together, watching him, waiting. He had no plan, no guidance, only the burning memory of his brother's voice. He pulled his hat back on, squaring his shoulders against the storm. "Come on," he said at last, voice rough but steady. "We're going home." The children hesitated, then moved as one, following him into the gathering dark. Ethan kept his eyes forward, but the weight of their footsteps behind him struck harder than any bullet. He felt the shape of a new life rising in the shadows, sharp and unyielding, as certain as the storm above. And though the rain fell heavy, the ground still seemed too dry, too brittle, as though the earth itself held its breath for what would come next. The rain did not let up for 2 days. It drummed on the cabin roof until the wood groaned and swelled, and in that relentless downpour Ethan Carter discovered just how unprepared he was to keep 4 children alive. The beans he had carried home stretched only so far, watered down into a thin broth that tasted of ash and regret. Rose sipped dutifully, Maggie coaxed the younger 2 into swallowing, and Caleb shoved his bowl aside with a scowl. "This ain't food," the boy muttered, arms crossed. "Pa never made us eat slop like this." Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to lash out, to tell the boy there was nothing left but what he could scrape together, but the words lodged in his throat. Caleb's glare cut deeper than he would admit, because in it Ethan saw the truth. He was failing. Morning came grey and cold. Ethan tried again, fumbling with the skillet, burning bacon to a char before he managed to salvage 2 strips. The smell was acrid, smoke curling through the rafters, and the children coughed as they chewed. Maggie whispered soft encouragement to Rose, who cried at the bitterness. Caleb refused altogether, pushing back his chair so hard it scraped the floor. "You don't know what you're doing," the boy said flatly. Ethan slammed the skillet onto the table, metal clanging loud in the silence. "Then maybe you'd like to try." The challenge hung heavy. Caleb's chin lifted, but he did not move. His defiance was armor, Ethan realized, a shield against hunger and grief. He could not decide if it made him proud or furious. By midday, the ranch was chaos. The chickens scattered as the children chased them with more noise than skill. The horse kicked at its stall, restless from neglect. Ethan's hands were raw from mending fences while also keeping watch for the little ones who strayed too close to trouble. Maggie tried to help, steady as her young frame allowed, but she was a child herself, already stretched thin by the burden of her siblings. That evening, when the children were finally inside, Ethan caught a flicker of movement near the corral, 2 shadows slipping through the brush. His rifle was in his hands before thought caught up. He fired a shot into the air, the crack echoing across the hills. The shadows bolted. He stood there a long while, heart thudding, until he was sure they were gone. Yet the message was clear. Men had seen weakness in this place. They would come again. Inside, Tommy clung to Ethan's leg, trembling from the sound of the gunfire. Maggie tried to be brave, stroking her brother's hair with shaky hands. Caleb watched from the corner, eyes sharp, as if measuring whether Ethan could truly protect them. Sleep came restless, filled with dreams of hollow-eyed bandits and his brother's voice rasping for a promise. At dawn, Ethan sat at the table, head in his hands, when a knock startled him. Firm, unhesitant, it rattled the door on its hinges. He opened it to find a woman standing straight in the early light, a pot dangling from one hand, a ladle in the other. She was dressed in black, simple and practical, her bonnet pulled low against the wind. Her eyes, though, were steady as a gun barrel. "Name's Clara Dawson," she said without preamble. "I heard there were hungry mouths here." Ethan's first instinct was suspicion. He glanced past her, half expecting a trap, but saw nothing but the open land stretching bleak behind her. The children, drawn by the smell of something within the pot, crowded close before he could speak. Rose tugged at his sleeve. "Is it food?" Clara smiled faintly, setting the pot on the table as though she had lived here all along. She stirred with practiced ease, the aroma of stew filling the cramped cabin, rich and heavy in a way Ethan's thin broth had never managed. The children's eyes widened, their hunger no longer patient but desperate. "You can't just barge in here," Ethan said, though even to his ears it sounded hollow. Clara ladled steaming portions into bowls, her voice brisk. "I can when I see children starving." She handed the first bowl to Maggie, who accepted it with a whispered thank you. Ethan bristled. "They're my responsibility." She met his glare with one of her own. "Then act like it. Feeding them isn't optional." The words struck deep, though her tone carried no cruelty, only bluntness. The children ate greedily, spoons scraping against bowls, and for the first time since Sam's death their faces relaxed, eyes half closed with relief. Even Caleb, stubborn as ever, surrendered to hunger and devoured 2 helpings before slumping back in his chair. Ethan stood at the edge of it all, feeling both replaced and relieved. The cabin, filled with the sound of slurping and soft sighs, no longer echoed with emptiness. Clara moved among the children with a sure hand, wiping Rose's chin, nudging Tommy to slow down, sharing a quiet word with Maggie. She belonged in a way Ethan did not, and that realization stung worse than any bandit's bullet. When the meal ended, Clara began washing bowls without asking, sleeves rolled high, movements efficient. Ethan watched her, unsettled. "Why are you here?" Her hands did not pause. "My husband was sheriff. Died in a shootout last winter. I've got no children of my own, and cooking for myself grows tiresome. I thought maybe I could make myself useful." The words were plain, yet something unspoken lingered beneath them, a loneliness not unlike his own. Still, pride burned in Ethan's chest. He did not like the implication that he could not manage. "You think I can't take care of them?" he asked. Clara turned, drying her hands on her apron, meeting his eyes evenly. "I think you're trying. But trying doesn't fill bellies." Silence stretched between them, taut and brittle. Outside, the storm cloud had broken, leaving the air crisp and clear, the smell of wet earth seeping through the doorframe. Inside, the children dozed with full stomachs, curled together like pups around the fading fire. Ethan finally sank into a chair, rubbing the back of his neck. He wanted to send Clara away, to prove he was enough, but the sight of the children, finally at peace, chained his tongue. His brother's last plea echoed in his mind, binding him tighter still. Later, when the fire had dimmed to coals, Ethan overheard Caleb whispering to Maggie in the dark corner. "She should stay," the boy said. "We'd be better off if she stayed. He can't do this alone." The word struck Ethan like a lash. He lay awake long after, staring at the beams above, the steady sound of children breathing in sleep filling the room. His hands, scarred and strong, felt suddenly useless. Clara's voice echoed alongside Caleb's, "Trying doesn't fill bellies." The storm had passed, but another gathered inside him, sharp and restless, promising no easy peace. Dawn spilled pale light over the ranch, catching the dew on fence rails and turning it to silver. Ethan Carter rose before the children stirred, slipping outside with his rifle slung over his shoulder. The night's word still echoed in his ears, Caleb declaring that Clara should stay, that Ethan was not enough. Pride had always been his armor, but pride did not milk cows or put food on a table. The fences leaned, the barn sagged, and 4 small lives depended on him not collapsing beneath the weight. When he returned, Clara already had a fire crackling, the skillet hissing with cornmeal cakes. The smell filled the cabin, and the children crowded the table as though gravity itself pulled them there. Ethan stood back, silent, watching her move with ease in the kitchen that had felt like a battlefield under his clumsy hands. "You could help, you know," Clara said without looking at him, sliding batter onto the pan. Ethan bristled. "Already been working since dawn." She gave the slightest smirk. "Fences won't fill bellies." The children laughed softly, hiding it behind their hands. Ethan's ears burned, but he swallowed his retort. He did not miss the way Caleb's eyes flickered to him, sharp, measuring whether Ethan could stand tall against this woman's blunt truths. Later, he saddled the horse and called for Tommy. The boy lingered in the doorway, hesitant, until Ethan crouched low and offered a hand. "You ever want to ride?" he asked. Tommy's eyes widened, fear battling with longing. At last he nodded, small fingers sliding into Ethan's callous palm. Together they mounted, Ethan steadying him as the horse shifted. At first the boy clutched so tight his knuckles blanched, but with each lap around the corral his grip loosened, laughter bursting from him in wild, bright peals. Ethan felt something stir in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth, fragile but real. Maggie watched from the fence, eyes wide with wonder. When Tommy slid down, still giggling, she whispered, "They'll be all right with you." Her faith pierced deeper than Caleb's doubt. Ethan touched his hat brim, unable to answer, but her words lingered like balm. Clara proved more than a cook. When a wagon wheel cracked, she fetched tools and repaired it with practiced hands. When chickens strayed, she herded them back with sharp claps and a voice that brooked no nonsense. She moved through the ranch with a quiet authority, as though she had always belonged. And yet, beneath her steady surface, Ethan glimpsed shadows, moments when her eyes strayed to the horizon, distant, carrying sorrow he did not ask about. One evening, as the sun bled into the hills, Clara found him sharpening a knife by the porch. She leaned against the post, arms folded. "You think being a man is about blood," she said without preamble. About passing on your name. Ethan stiffened, the blade pausing mid-stroke. But those children don't care about blood, she went on. They care about bread. They care about someone who won't leave. Her words landed heavy, raw against the wound he carried. He wanted to shout, to deny, but all he managed was a low, strained, "Easy for you to say." Clara's gaze softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Easy. My husband bled out in the dirt, and I buried him with my own hands. Nothing about this life is easy." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by crickets singing in the grass. Ethan set the knife down, his chest tight with things he could not voice. That night, danger came. A crash of hooves stirred him from sleep, and by the time he reached the window, shapes moved in the moonlight. Bandits, 3 of them at least, slipping through the fence, heading straight for the barn. Ethan grabbed his rifle and burst outside, shouting for Clara. She was already awake, rifle in hand, eyes sharp as glass. Together they fired warning shots, but the intruders did not scatter as before. They ducked behind cover, returning fire, bullets spitting splinters from the fence. The children screamed inside. Caleb, reckless, burst from the doorway with a stick in his hand as though it were a weapon. Ethan's blood froze. "Get back!" he roared, sprinting toward the boy. A shot rang out, kicking dirt at Caleb's feet. Ethan grabbed him, dragging him down behind the trough, heart hammering with a fear so sharp it hollowed him. "Are you out of your damn mind?" he hissed, shaking the boy's shoulders. Caleb's jaw trembled though his glare held. "I can fight." "You'll get yourself killed," Ethan snapped. His voice broke, softer now. "Don't you ever make me bury another brother." The words ripped free before he could stop them. Caleb blinked, anger faltering, and for the first time the boy looked at Ethan not with defiance but with something closer to recognition. Clara's shot cracked through the night, grazing one bandit's arm, sending them stumbling back. Ethan fired beside her, the recoil rattling his bones. The attackers cursed, retreating into the brush with a promise tossed over their shoulders. "This ain't over." The ranch fell silent, smoke curling from the rifle barrels, the smell of gunpowder sharp in the air. Ethan stood trembling, one hand still clamped on Caleb's shoulder. He realized only then that his grip had softened, not restraining but holding, as though letting go might mean losing him. Inside, they calmed the others. Rose sobbed until Clara gathered her in strong arms. Maggie clung to Tommy, whispering that they were safe. Ethan cleaned his rifle in silence, jaw set, but inside something shifted. He no longer saw 4 burdens. He saw blood he had sworn to protect, whether it was his or not. When the children finally drifted into uneasy sleep, Clara leaned against the hearth, her face pale but steady. "They'll come back," she said. "Stronger." Ethan met her eyes, steel meeting steel. "Then so will we." The word surprised him, steady and sure. Clara's expression softened, approval flickering in her gaze. Yet the weight of what loomed pressed hard on Ethan's shoulders. He had kept his promise tonight, but tomorrow would demand more, and the battle for these children was far from won. The morning broke clear, a false peace stretched thin across the ranch. The air smelled of wet grass and ash, the memory of gunpowder lingering like a warning. Ethan Carter rose with the first light, his body sore, his arm bandaged where a splinter had cut him deep. The children slept huddled together on the floor, their faces softened by dreams that could not hold against the day ahead. He watched them a long moment, knowing the bandits' promise hung in the silence. This ain't over. He stepped outside, boots sinking into damp earth. The land was still, yet his instincts told him it would not remain so. Clara joined him soon after, her rifle across her back, her dark dress dusted at the hem. She did not speak, only glanced at him with steady eyes, and in that silence an agreement formed. If the fight came, they would stand shoulder to shoulder. Through the day, preparations consumed them. Fences were shored up, doors braced with planks, lantern oil set by the windows to light the night. Ethan taught Maggie to string a bow from an old hunting kit, her hands trembling at first but growing steadier. He showed Tommy how to whistle sharp and clear if he saw danger near. Even Rose, small as she was, carried water with solemn determination. Caleb worked beside Ethan without complaint, lifting, hauling, fetching tools. The boy's silence said more than words. The defiance had not vanished, but respect had begun to take root. When the sun dipped low, the land held its breath. Crickets fell quiet, and the horizon darkened not just with dusk but with the shapes of riders cresting the ridge. Dust rose behind them, a dirty halo around men hungry for easy prey. Ethan counted 6 this time, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. His stomach tightened, but he forced his breath steady. Inside, the children's faces paled as Clara gave calm, clipped orders. Maggie herded Rose and Tommy beneath the table, pressing them low against the earth. Caleb hovered at the door, eyes burning with the need to fight. Ethan gripped his shoulder, firm but gentle. "Stay with them. They need you more than I do." Caleb's jaw worked, torn between pride and duty, but at last he nodded. Ethan had never felt prouder. The riders closed in, laughter carrying on the night wind, cruel and certain. Ethan and Clara stepped onto the porch, rifles ready. The leader, a scar-faced man with teeth yellow as corn husks, reined in his horse. "You think a couple shots will keep us off?" he sneered. "We came for what's ours." Ethan's voice was steady. "Ain't a damn thing here that belongs to you." The man chuckled, signaling his men forward. Gunfire erupted, shattering the stillness. Bullets tore splinters from the porch rail. Ethan and Clara fired back, their rifles cracking sharp. One rider fell, horse screaming as it bolted. The others spread out, circling, smoke and thunder mixing in the dark. Inside, the children huddled close, the roar of battle rattling the walls. Maggie whispered prayers under her breath, clutching Rose tight. Tommy whimpered, hands over his ears, until Caleb took hold of him, steadying his younger brother with the calm Ethan had once thought impossible in the boy. Outside, Ethan fought with grit carved from years of loneliness. Each shot he fired was not for pride, not for himself, but for the 4 small lives depending on him. Clara moved with fierce precision, her rifle steady, eyes cold as river stone. She covered him when he reloaded, shouted warnings when shadows shifted. Side by side, they held the line. Then chaos cracked open. One bandit broke through, charging the porch with pistol drawn. Ethan raised his rifle but too late. The shot rang, grazing his arm, spinning him back. Pain seared hot, but before the man could fire again, Caleb burst from the doorway with Ethan's old revolver clenched in his shaking hand. He pulled the trigger once, twice, until the intruder collapsed in the dirt. Ethan's heart thundered, pride and terror colliding. "Get back inside," he roared, but Caleb's eyes shone with something fierce, a boy stepping into a man's shadow. Still, Ethan herded him back, shielding him as bullets whined through the night. The fight dragged on, the air thick with smoke and sweat. At last, when the lantern oil blazed in the yard, fire lighting their faces in harsh gold, the bandits faltered. 2 lay still, 1 clutched a broken arm, and the rest scattered into the hills with curses trailing like smoke. Silence followed, jagged and unreal. Ethan stood swaying, rifle slack in his grip, the wound in his arm throbbing. Clara steadied him, her hand firm against his back. For the first time since his brother's death, he let himself lean on someone else. Inside, the children rushed to him, relief spilling in sobs and clinging arms. Rose pressed her face against his chest, whispering, "You didn't leave us." Maggie's tears wet his shirt. Tommy clung to his leg, and Caleb stood apart only for a moment before stepping forward, eyes lowered in respect. Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, squeezing gently. No words passed, but the bond was forged in fire and fear, unbreakable. Later, when wounds were bound and the house quieted, they gathered by the hearth. Clara stitched Ethan's arm with steady hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. "You're a fool," she muttered, though her voice was softer than her words. "Reckon I am," Ethan answered, watching the children curled near the fire. "But I kept my promise." Clara's gaze followed his. The firelight painted her features in gold and shadow, softening the grief that lingered there. "They're your family now," she said. Ethan breathed deep, the truth of it heavy but no longer suffocating. "Family ain't always born," he murmured. "Sometimes it's built." The cabin settled into stillness, the storm outside finally broken. Ethan sat with the weight of the day pressing into his bones, yet for the first time in years, the hollow inside him was filled. The laughter of children, the steady presence of Clara, the quiet land waiting for morning, it all wrapped around him like a life he never thought he'd claim. He looked out the window where the horizon stretched wide and dark, endless as the road ahead. His brother's voice no longer haunted him. Instead, he heard the children's breathing, steady and alive. The fight was not the end but the beginning. And as Ethan Carter sat among the fragile pieces of this new family, he understood he was no longer a man defined by what he lacked, but by what he would defend.